Something feels off inside the White House right now, and it is not about politics. It is about a marriage. Donald Trump and Melania Trump barely speak to each other. They sleep in different rooms. Some weeks they live in different states. But this week, one thing brought them together in a way nobody expected, and it was not love. It was money, a lot of money. And once you see the numbers, you will understand why so many people are asking if this marriage was ever real at all. Let's start with the number that shocked almost everyone. This week, the president released his yearly financial disclosure. It is nearly 1,000 pages long, and buried deep inside it is one giant fact. In a single year, Donald Trump made more than $1.4 billion from crypto alone, not from real estate, not from golf courses. From crypto, a business he once called a total scam.
The president faces fresh scrutiny over new financial disclosures. They show that he made over $1 billion on crypto ventures last year. So when asked about that on the way to North Dakota this morning, he said this.
I don't get involved in my personal. We have funds that run my money.
But you are benefiting.
Well, I've made a lot of money before I became president, and they invest my money, and I don't talk to them. I don't even speak to them. So I have many people, I don't know what they call it.
In this clip, you can hear the president brushing off the backlash, telling reporters that everybody is profiting because the stock market is up. But that answer skips the real question. Everybody is not making over $1 billion a year while sitting in the White House. Most of that crypto money came from two places. One is called World Liberty Financial, a crypto company Trump started with his own sons. The other is his meme coin, a joke coin with his face on it that made his family more than $600 million in royalties alone. Think about that for a second. A joke coin made more money in 1 year than most people will see in 10 lifetimes. It helps to remember where this all started. Back in 2020, Trump himself said crypto was not a real currency and that its value was based on thin air. He said it made no sense and that he was not a fan. Fast forward just a few years, and that same man is now the single biggest financial winner in the entire crypto industry. That is not a small change of heart. That is a complete reversal, and it happened right around the same time his own family started building crypto businesses of their own. When someone flips their public opinion at the exact moment it becomes personally profitable, it is fair to ask whether the opinion ever mattered or whether the money was the plan all along. And here is the part that should really bother you. While Trump's family was cashing in, regular investors who bought into that same meme coin watched their money disappear. Financial reporters have tracked this closely, and the pattern is simple. The people at the top made a fortune. The regular people who trusted the coin lost theirs. That is not an accident. That is the business model. Let's slow down and really sit with that number for a second, because it is easy to hear $1.4 billion and let it just wash over you like it is some abstract figure on a screen. It is not abstract. That is more money than most small towns bring in from taxes in an entire year. That is more money than thousands of American families will earn across their entire working lives, combined. And it landed in one family's pocket in 12 months, while that same family sat inside the most powerful house in the country. Compare that to what past presidents have reported. Barack Obama's final disclosure form was 8 pages long. Joe Biden's was 11 pages. Trump's newest disclosure is close to 1,000 pages. That is not a small difference. That is a completely different scale of business activity happening while someone is supposed to be running the country full time. When the size of a president's paperwork jumps from a handful of pages to nearly 1,000, it should raise a simple question. How much of the presidency has actually become a side project to the business? So how does the president explain owning a business that regulates the very industry making him rich? He does not really try to. When reporters pushed him on whether this was a conflict of interest, his answer was to act like he barely knows what is happening with his own money.
Hi, and thank you for joining us. President Trump claims he is not involved in his personal financial dealings. A day after financial disclosure forms revealed he made more than $1 billion in cryptocurrency ventures last year. Trump spoke about the disclosure today while on his way to the opening of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library aboard the new Air Force One, gifted from Qatar. He was asked about critics who claim he's profiting off the presidency.
Listen to that clip again. The President of the United States is telling you on camera that he does not really know how his own businesses are making him $1 billion a year. Either that is true, which means someone else in his family or his business is steering hundreds of millions of dollars around him without him watching, or it is not true, and he knows exactly what is happening and just does not want to say it out loud. Neither answer is good. Both of them should worry you. Now the White House has an answer ready every single time this comes up. A spokesperson keeps repeating the same line, that neither the president nor his family has ever engaged in any conflict of interest. But you do not need a law degree to look at these numbers and ask a simple question. If a regular government employee started a company, then pushed for laws that helped that exact company, and then made over $1 billion from it in 1 year, would we call that clean? Or would we call it exactly what it looks like?
All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, all you magnificent melon heads. Happy Wednesday, everybody, and welcome to the third quarter. Today is July 1st, 2026, and I hate this story, but it is the top story this morning. I would love to talk about anything else, believe me.
This clip lays it out plainly. Nearly 1,000 pages of disclosures, and crypto sits right at the center of almost all of it. For comparison, past presidents filed disclosure forms that were only a handful of pages long. Trump's is close to 1,000. That alone tells you how tangled his business empire has become with his time in office. But the crypto fortune is only half of this story. The other half belongs to Melania, and her numbers are just as strange if you actually stop and look at them. Buried in that same disclosure is a detail that made jaws drop across the internet. Melania made more than $10 million from a documentary about her own life, a documentary that barely anyone watched. The film reportedly cost around $40 million to buy the rights to, plus millions more to promote it, and when it finally hit theaters, it pulled in only about $16 million at the box office. That is a massive loss for the studio. But Melania still walked away with a $10 million payday, on top of another $500,000 from her memoir and several million more from something described as digital collectibles tied to her name. Ask yourself a simple question. If a movie about you loses tens of millions of dollars, why would you still be one of the highest paid people connected to it? The answer people keep landing on is simple. It was never really about the movie. It was about who was paying and why. Think about how this would sound if it happened to almost anyone else. Imagine your neighbor tells you they just made $10 million from a home movie about their own life, and almost nobody actually watched it. You would not call that a success story. You would call it strange, and you would start asking who really wrote that check and what they wanted in return. The only difference here is that the neighbor in this story happens to be married to the President of the United States, and the company writing the check happens to need the government to stay friendly. This is not the first time a Trump family project has made money in a way that seems disconnected from how well it actually did. Books that were not bestsellers still generated real income. Branded products from watches to fragrances to sneakers keep showing up on these disclosure forms. Small details, sure, but they add up to a pattern that repeats itself year after year. Money keeps finding its way to this family, and it rarely seems tied to normal supply and demand. The company behind that documentary is one of the largest in the world, and it has business in front of the federal government constantly. Lawmakers have already raised questions about whether this deal was really about telling Melania's story or whether it was about a powerful company trying to stay on good terms with the president by writing checks to his wife. Nobody has proven a crime here. But the pattern is impossible to ignore. Money moves toward the Trump family from companies that need something from the government every single time. So we have a husband bringing in over $1 billion from crypto and a wife bringing in millions from a movie nobody watched. Two separate paydays, Two separate businesses, but the same family cashing every single check. And yet, by almost every account, these two barely function as a couple at all. That brings us to someone who has become impossible to ignore inside this White House, a woman named Natalie Harp. She is 34 years old, and she is the president's executive assistant. But calling her just an assistant does not really capture it. According to multiple reporters who have written entire books about this administration, Harp is with the president almost around the clock. She reportedly prints out flattering news articles for him to read, manages parts of his social media, and follows him nearly everywhere, including on the golf course. That title alone should stop you in your tracks. Reporters who have covered this closely say Harp has left personal notes for the president, including one that reportedly told him he is all that matters to her. Two separate books written by well-known journalists describe Trump telling people around him that Harp would never leave him. And according to reporting, Melania herself once found Harp inside the private living quarters of the White House late at night, an area that is normally reserved only for family. Now, does Melania seem bothered by any of this? Based on everything we have seen, not really. She has not addressed it publicly. She has not pulled her husband aside for a press conference. She has continued living her own separate life, largely away from Washington, while the checks keep clearing. And that silence tells you almost as much as words would. In most marriages, a spouse finding another woman inside their private living quarters late at night would be the kind of thing that blows everything up. Here, it barely made a ripple. No public statement, no dramatic confrontation caught on camera. Just two people continuing on with their separate schedules, their separate homes, and their separate priorities, almost like nothing happened at all. That reaction, or really that lack of a reaction, is what makes so many people question whether real affection was ever the foundation of this relationship in the first place. Reporters who cover the White House closely describe Melania as someone who has always kept a careful distance from the day-to-day chaos of her husband's political life. She shows up for the big, unavoidable moments. She skips the smaller ones whenever she can. She has spent long stretches of time away from Washington entirely, living largely on her own terms in New York or at Mar-a-Lago. For a first lady, that kind of independence is unusual. For a marriage, it is a pretty loud signal all by itself. This is where the emotional side of this story really lands. Because if you step back and look at this marriage as a whole, it starts to look less like a partnership and more like two separate businesses that happen to share one address. Separate bedrooms, separate cities, separate income streams. The only thing that consistently brings them into the same headline is money moving into their accounts. And then just a few months ago, something happened that nobody saw coming. Melania walked out in front of cameras at the White House and gave a public statement almost entirely on her own. No advance warning to most of the staff. According to reporting from multiple outlets, even her own husband said he did not know what she was about to say. Think about how strange that moment really was. The First Lady stood alone at the White House and directly denied any close relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, saying she was never his victim, was never on his plane, and never visited his private island. She said Epstein did not introduce her to her husband, and that she first met Donald at a party in New York back in 1998. She even addressed an old email exchange with Ghislaine Maxwell, calling it nothing more than a casual, trivial note. Here is what stands out the most. She gave this entire statement without her husband standing next to her. He was not there. He reportedly did not even know the exact words she planned to say. For a White House where nearly every public statement is normally planned and approved days in advance, this was almost unheard of. It showed the country something important. Melania Trump operates completely on her own terms. She is not waiting for her husband's permission, and she is not particularly worried about protecting his image either. She is protecting her own. She even used part of that moment to call on Congress to hold public hearings so survivors of Epstein's crimes could testify under oath. That is a bigger political ask than almost anything her husband's own team has been willing to say out loud on this topic. Whether you believe every word of her statement or not, one thing is clear. She was not there to defend her husband's reputation. She was there to defend her own, on her own timeline, using her own words, without checking in with the man she is supposedly building a life with. And that is really the heart of this whole story. Not one single scandal, but a pattern that keeps repeating. Two people who make major decisions, major money, and major public statements almost entirely apart from each other. A president who profits from an industry he is supposed to be regulating fairly. A first lady who profits from a documentary that flopped everywhere except her own bank account. An aide who seems closer to the president on a daily basis than his own wife, and a marriage that seems to run less like a partnership and more like two separate corporations that happen to share a mailing address at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So put it all together. A husband who claims he barely understands his own billion-dollar crypto business. A wife who collected millions from a movie almost nobody watched. An aide who reportedly spends more time with the president than his own wife does. And a first lady who will walk out in front of the entire country to defend her own name, without even telling her husband what she plans to say. That is not a portrait of two people in love. That is a portrait of two people running parallel operations under one roof, connected mainly by money and by the fact that neither one wants to be the one who walks away first. Whatever you want to call this marriage, one thing is now impossible to deny. The paperwork does not lie. Over $1 billion flowed into this family in a single year, from crypto ventures, from a documentary deal, from settlements, and from a dozen other sources most Americans will never fully see. Meanwhile, the actual relationship between the two people at the center of it all looks colder than ever. Separate lives, separate bank accounts getting fatter by the day, and a country left to wonder what is actually holding this marriage together, besides the money. If this breakdown opened your eyes to something you had not put together before, that is exactly why we do this. Stay with us, because this story is nowhere near finished, and we will keep bringing you the facts as they come out.